Before we dive into our journey to the past, do me one huge favor. If you love history, if you're fascinated by stories of war, technology, and the people who changed the course of events, subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Your support is a signal that deep dives like this are needed. And be sure to write in the comments what other piece of military tech or battle you'd like to learn about. Your opinion is extremely important to me. Now, get ready. We're heading back to the 1940s, to the battlefields of World War II's Eastern Front, where the fate of the world was being decided, where the steel fist of German tigers and panthers seemed unstoppable. But the Red Army had its own, unexpected for many, ace up the sleeve. Not as famous as the T-34 tank, but no less important. This is the story of self-propelled guns, or SPGs. A story about how ingenuity, resourcefulness, and dire necessity gave birth to a weapon that became a real nightmare for the famed German armored beasts. The unarmed giant. Why infantry and tanks weren't enough. Imagine the fall of 1941 or the spring of 1942. After the first crushing blows from the Wehrmacht, the Red Army is in retreat, suffering enormous losses. German armored spearheads, their famous pincer movements, slice through Soviet defenses. There comes a moment when this steel tide must be stopped at all costs. We have infantry, brave but poorly armed against tanks. We have artillery, regimental guns that could take out a tank, but they are heavy, cumbersome. They need to be pulled by horses, which in the autumn mud or spring thaw becomes a hellish task. The artillery crew literally sinks into the mud along with their horses, unable to keep up with the rapidly changing frontline situation. German motorized units outflank them, and the heroic gunners often die without even having time to deploy their guns. Tanks? Yes, there were many, but the vast majority were light T-26s and B-team models, which by then were hopelessly obsolete. Their armor could be pierced by practically all German guns, and their own weapons were too weak against new German medium tanks. A terrible imbalance emerged. Soviet infantry was pinned down by fire, while German tanks, feeling untouchable, would approach almost point-blank, raking the trenches with fire. They needed something that could quickly rush to a threatened sector, deliver a powerful artillery strike, and just as quickly change position to avoid return fire. They needed a mobile, powerful, and crucially inexpensive to produce fighter. This fighter became the self-propelled gun. An SPG is, in simple terms, a hybrid of a gun and a tank. From the tank, it took the chassis, the engine, and the ability to move on its own across the battlefield. From classic artillery, it took a powerful gun, often larger than what could be fitted in a rotating turret. But the key was the lack of a turret. This might seem like a disadvantage, but in reality, it was a brilliant simplification. An economic perspective. Let's look at the situation from the economics of war. War is not just about heroism. It's also a giant production machine. Every ruble, every kilogram of metal, every hour of labor is precious. Producing a tank with a rotating turret is a complex technological process. The turret, the traverse mechanism, the complex aiming system, all of this required precision machinery and skilled workers. The SPG was simpler. The gun was mounted directly into a fixed superstructure, a small, stationary armored box, on the chassis of an existing tank. This provided colossal savings in time and resources. According to some estimates, the production cost of one Su-76 SPG was roughly 30 to 40% lower than that of a T-34 tank. Now, imagine, in the time it took to build one tank, you could produce 1.5 SPGs. In conditions where factories were being evacuated to the east and setting up production literally under the open sky, such simplicity was a lifesaver. This was a victory of engineering ingenuity over resource constraints. The first steps. The Su-12, a Tachanka for the industrial age. The history of Soviet SPGs began even before the war. in the mid-1930s. And the first experiments were, let's be honest, not very successful, but instructive. One of these first attempts was the Su-12. What was it? It was the chassis of a standard AAA truck, the famous Polyatorka, on which a 76mm regimental gun was mounted. It was an impressive sight, but from a military standpoint, extremely vulnerable. Imagine a tall truck silhouette protected on all sides by thin steel plates just 4 millimeters thick. These plates could maybe stop bullets and shrapnel, but any direct hit from a cannon or even a heavy machine gun would turn this self-propelled gun into scrap metal. Soldiers jokingly called them self-propelled coffins. But, and this is a very important but, even in this primitive form, SPGs showed their main advantage: mobility. A gun that previously had to be dragged by horses for hours could now move under its own power on roads at speeds up to 50 kilometers per hour. It could quickly advance, fire a few shots, and retreat before the enemy could pinpoint its location and return fire. However, the wheel design was a dead end. The truck was helpless off-road. Where carts with guns got stuck, the Su-12 got stuck too. Engineers quickly realized that the future lay with track chassis. Tracks provided much better cross-country performance and, importantly, less vulnerability. It's harder to disable a track than a wheel. By 1936, 99 of these self-propelled guns had been built. Their operational experience clearly showed a truck chassis was a dead end. But the idea of a mobile gun was so compelling that they didn't abandon it. They just changed direction. A new approach. The Su-52, born on tracks. Having learned from their mistake, engineers at the Leningrad Experimental Machine Building Plant number 185 took a different approach. They used the chassis of the light T-26 tank. This is how the Su-52 was born. This was a much more serious machine. The track chassis gave it cross-country ability comparable to tanks. It was armed with a 122mm howitzer, a weapon of devastating power for its time. Externally, these first tracked SPGs still looked like strange hybrids. A low-profile superstructure with a long gun barrel sticking out of it, mounted on a tank chassis. They didn't command the same awe and respect as fearsome tanks with rotating turrets. The Army was initially skeptical, considering them second-rate weapons, makeshift contraptions. This initial opinion proved deceptive. The SPG was destined for a modest but vitally important role: to follow the infantry and tanks and promptly suppress enemy strongpoints, machine gun nests, and artillery positions. Its armor was still weak, the same 4 to 7 millimeters, protecting mainly from shrapnel. Its 76mm armor-piercing shell could deal with light German tanks and armored personnel carriers, but was useless against the frontal armor of new Tigers and Panthers. But in the early war, when the main German tanks were still the Panzer II, III, and the Czech Panzer 38, the Su-52 and its kind were very effective. They could get to places where conventional artillery couldn't. They were that mobile reserve for a commander, capable of plugging a gap in the defense or supporting an unexpected breakthrough. The heavy monster, the KV-2, tank or SPG, a dead end or a genius idea. Now, let's talk about a machine that still sparks heated debates among historians and armor enthusiasts. The heavy tank KV-2. Why are we discussing it in a story about SPGs? Because, in essence, the KV-2 was more of a heavy self-propelled gun than a classic tank. Look at it. A huge, sluggish, concrete bunker-like turret. Inside that turret, a giant 152mm howitzer. The power of this gun was absolutely monstrous. Its shell could literally tear apart any German tank of the period. Its armor thickness, 75mm on the front and up to 110 on the gun mantlet, made it practically invulnerable to most German guns in 1941 and early 42. The Germans called it the Russian monster in terror. It seemed like the perfect tank destroyer, but in reality, things were more complicated. The KV-2 was a creature of paradoxes. Its main flaw stemmed from its very advantages. The giant's problems: low mobility. Its enormous mass, over 52 tons, made the tank very slow. On a good road, it could barely reach 20 kilometers per hour. Off-road, its speed dropped to 3 or 7 kilometers per hour, slower than a walking person. The engine and transmission were constantly overstrained and broke down. Crews had to repair the vehicle after every somewhat lengthy march. Unreliability. The electric turret traverse was complex and finicky. It often failed at the most critical moment, rendering the huge gun useless, as manually traversing it was nearly impossible. Inability to fire on the move. Due to the massive recoil and the risk of breaking the transmission, firing on the move was strictly forbidden. The tank had to come to a complete stop, which on the battlefield made it a perfect target. As a result, the KV-2 was often used as a stationary pillbox. It would be dug into the ground, carefully camouflaged, and used as a fortified firing point on the most critical defensive sectors. Essentially, it was a self-propelled gun stripped of its main advantage, mobility. It was a dead end, but a very illustrative one. It became clear they needed a machine combining the power of the KV-2 with the mobility of light SPGs. War is the mother of improvisation. BSU-26 and ZAS-30. The war caught the Red Army in the middle of rearmament. Many new models of equipment were still green, while old ones were hopelessly obsolete. In this desperate situation, true grassroots ingenuity was born. On the front lines and in repair shops, real improvisation began. The chassis of decommissioned but still numerous light T-26 tanks became the base for makeshift self-propelled guns. Their turrets were removed, and a 76mm gun was installed in an open-topped fighting compartment. This is how the Su-26 appeared. It was a true field modification, but it saved the day. The armor was weak, but this SPG could move quickly and support the infantry with fire. It was indispensable in the defensive battles of 41. But the real breakthrough, the first specialized anti-tank SPG, was the ZIS-30. Its story is one of brilliant simplicity and speed. In 1941, the need for a mobile tank destroyer became acute on the front. Anti-tank guns were effective, but just as cumbersome as regimental artillery. Engineers at Plant No. 92, under the legendary Vasily Grabin, found a brilliant solution. They took a light artillery tractor, the Komsomolets, based on the T-20 tankette, and mounted the newest, extremely powerful 57mm ZIS-2 anti-tank gun on it. This gun was, at the time, one of the best anti-tank guns in the world, capable of penetrating the armor of any German tank from long range. What was the result? A light, fast, speeds up to 50 kilometers per hour, vehicle with a long-barreled, deadly gun. The crew of 5 was protected from bullets and shrapnel by a small armored shield. For self-defense, it had a DT machine gun. The ZS-30 could unexpectedly appear on the flank of a German tank attack, fire a few accurate shots, and just as quickly disappear. Effectiveness analysis. The appearance of the ZS-30 was an unpleasant surprise for the Germans. They were used to Soviet anti-tank artillery being static. But here they were being hit by a small, nimble target that was hard to hit. Production of the ZS-30 was small, only about 100 units, mainly due to a shortage of tractor chassis. But they proved the concept itself. A mobile anti-tank gun on a track chassis is a weapon of great effectiveness. These SPGs fought all the way until 44, which speaks to their incredible survivability and value to the troops. A legend is born, the Su-76, the main answer to the Cats. The experience gained from creating and using the ZS-30, plus the harsh lessons learned from encounters with new German heavy tanks, led to the emergence of the most mass-produced and perhaps most famous Soviet SPG of the war, the Su-76. It was based on the chassis of the most mass-produced Soviet tank, the T-34. The turret was removed, and a spacious armored superstructure was built in its place, with a 76mm S-3 gun, the same as on early model T-34 tanks, mounted in the front plate. What did this achieve? Excellent mobility. The Su-76 inherited all the best driving qualities of the T-34. It was fast, maneuverable, and had good cross-country ability. Low silhouette. The lack of a turret made the vehicle significantly lower than a tank, making it harder to spot and hit. Simplicity of production. As we already discussed, producing the Su-76 was cheaper and faster than producing a tank. Powerful gun. The 76mm gun was an excellent weapon against most targets. And with the introduction of tungsten carbide core, APCR, ammunition, it could also take on tigers and panthers by hitting their sides at close range. The Su-76 became the true workhorse of the war. It was used both for infantry support and as a tank destroyer. Crews loved this machine for its reliability and simplicity. German tankers quickly learned to respect the low, squat silhouettes of the succus that could ambush them and deliver a lethal blow. This was the perfect realization of the concept. Cheap, mass-produced, effective. The Su-76 was not a super weapon that could win the war single-handedly. It was a building block, a reliable soldier, thousands of which were needed to build victory. Thousands of these machines fought all the way to Berlin, becoming one of the main symbols of the Red Army's artillery power. The invisible heroes of victory. So why did SPGs become that ace that helped deal with the German cats? The answer is simple. They were the right weapon at the right time and in the right place. They embodied the main principles that led the USSR to victory in that terrible war. Mass production, simplicity, effectiveness. It was an answer to the challenges of total war, where everything was counted in thousands of units of equipment, where not only the power of a single machine mattered, but how many such machines could be produced and sent to the front. SPGs weren't as famous as the 34 tanks. Their crews rarely became heroes in newspaper articles. Their work was less spectacular, but no less important. They were the invisible heroes who timely supported the infantry, stopped tank attacks, and ensured the success of offensives. They proved that sometimes genius lies not in complexity, but in the ability to find a simple and correct solution under conditions of extreme scarcity. This story teaches us that the path to success often lies not in creating one superweapon, but in finding an optimal, viable solution that can be replicated and that solves a specific problem. And that is exactly what self-propelled guns became for the Red Army. That's all, folks. I hope this deep dive was interesting and informative for you. If it was, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, support the video with a like, and write in the comments what you'd like to learn about next. Maybe the legendary Katyusha rocket launcher or secret German tank projects. Your opinion shapes our future content. Thanks for watching until the end. See you next time.